So good morning. My name is Aneesh de Vos, as ever, and we have the most ponderful David Butler with us today. And I assure you that David has got lots of connection problems this morning, so he is going to be in and out like a little bumblebee. And really, really excited, as ever, to have Robert Hines with us today. Now, Robert is a humanistic counsellor, yet he describes himself as an experiential, person-centred counsellor that works from the bottom to the top with young people and adults. So today, I don't need to explain to anybody that across the world, which began in America with the death of George Floyd, there is a racial awareness. Certainly, I'm 50, so in my lifetime, it would have been Martin Luther King, just as I was born. But in my lifetime of memory, I have never experienced anything to this extent. As ever, I'm a little bit arsy. I am absolutely, as many people are, horrified by what is happening. And David and I specifically asked Robert to come in today to talk to us because we want to talk about racial trauma. And Robert said yes, which is great. And David said yes, just in case his connection has disappeared. But David, can you wave just to tell us you're with us? No? See, he can't. So Robert, I mean, clearly this has really gained traction, and rightly so. You know, thank heavens for social media right now, that we can really see these, some of them incredibly harrowing and distressing pictures. That's not, you know, George Floyd's death. I mean, that was absolutely horrendous. But since then, the distressing and harrowing pictures of how the police, some protesters, you know, against the police, that this is a massive, quite a violent altercation going on. What do you think, Robert?
Well, and you know what, I've got to admit, is that feedback? No. So I've got to admit that I'm not a follower of social media for my own personal reasons. However, from what you have described, that it's shocking to think that the police are engaging in almost like street light battle with citizens, and that in order to quell the situation, so to speak, the measures to take is strong force with young people as well. And I think doing things like that, it changes the conversation, the whole conversation around racism in general, because then it becomes more about the city and individual citizens, rather than it being about racism as a whole. And it distracts people, those people who there are protesting. Okay, some of them themselves, they may be a little bit fired up themselves, they may have gone a bit step over the mark. However, those professionals who are there to monitor the crowd, they are positioned to, they have been trained to deal with things like that. This is not something that's new to them. And so this should, you would expect that they would just kind of fall into line, kind of thing. This is a protocol we need to do, as much as the antagonistic, if they are. In order for us to diffuse it, it's just best to not react the same as the protesters are reacting towards us. Almost like the parent-adult kind of situation and transactional analysis. The police could be, they could be the adults in the situation, and that could kind of help to calm some of the situation down.
Yeah, because certainly when you see other, I mean, because, you know, it's sporadic, because in other police situations, and we're looking at talking about the ones at the moment in America, some of the police are taking the knee Some of them are saying, do you know what, I'm taking off my shield and I'm marching with you. Some of them are protecting the protesters as well. So, you know, but these seem quite sporadic. What I really loved then, I don't know about you, David, what I really loved was the fact that you said that there is a difference, that these police officers are professionals. This is what their supposed training is about, to ensure that these protests can be safe, because there are a lot of people in there that are just protesting, you know, in a safe and compassionate manner. But of course, there's always going to be an outsider, isn't there, that's going to want to infiltrate, to antagonize. Absolutely. So David, what do you think? I mean, I just love what Robert's just said about that difference between the professional and what their training is, and how it should be a protection.
Maybe I'm getting, I think, as time goes by, particularly in this situation, and especially the American attitudes to policing, which I am familiar with, having worked there a little bit in my time. And I think the police have become something else. And there have been, ever since, but for example, if you look at, and I'm not to detract from the racism, racial aspect of what we're talking about, I think the police became something else in a more extreme version round about the miners' strikes in the 80s, where we actually saw them acting out, if you like, a political agenda. It was almost like suppression. It was keeping stuff down. And I think that has subtly crept into the way that we police these days, in that, you know, I am white privileged, if you like, but there is another privilege above white privilege, which comes from, if you like, the layers of society. And it seems that some people are more privileged than others. And it often occurs to me that, again, this is a personal point of view, is that some are above and look down and use the police as for their own agenda. And that might sound a bit controversial, but it's obvious to me in that some people tend to get off quite lightly, and the bottom tiers of society don't. And it seems to me often quite contrived. And I know there are good police out there. I know there's some bad police out there, but the general agenda seems to be one of keeping some parts of society in line. Yeah, I think that's the best way I can put it.
So going to that, David, and you make a really valid point, and going to that and looking at that, you know, these levels. Robert, can I ask you a really direct question? Because I've never been anything else, have I? Robert, how do you feel as a Black person walking along the streets or going in shopping centres, etc., if there are police around or security guards? What's your experience?
Past or recent present?
Wherever you want to go with it, because it's not like it happened just because George Floyd was murdered, is it? This is a continuum, and this pot has boiled over now, rightly so.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I don't ever really recall actually embodying that thought and feeling that I'm being personally targeted by the police because I'm Black.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that so I haven't experienced what some Black people have experienced, whereby they have been stopped frequently because they have been Black and whatever. I've had one encounter of that, and actually at the time I was in my early 20s. I was actually driving on my way to work, and the description that the police apparently were following me for about a mile. Obviously, I didn't use my rear view mirror. And then when they did stop, I realised it was for me. And the only description they had was a black person driving a red car. And I'm like, really? And then I just went to work in the end. But aside of that, so I've never really embodied that. Where I do experience what you are asking, I experience that more at airports.
Okay.
Because
can you expand on that? That for me is a new one. So I'd be intrigued in what you're experiencing there.
So, and I have to be mindful, because there could be an element of slight paranoia in this, in a sense of overthinking, but having some training in security, so you kind of get to learn to watch and kind of see things. But it's quite fascinating how when I go to like airports, like especially through to America, and the customs people and the guards there, their heads twitch a lot more. Wow. And that's what I experience, because when I stand and watch and see other people going by them, they take very little notice. I actually purposely do things to see if they're going to react, and then they do, and then I even.
So you're doing a behavioural experiment almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of, and it's like, wow. And then even sometimes in how I experience it when you go through customs, how some of them, yeah, they can be harsh and brash. That's their job, that's how some of them are. But some of them can take it a bit too far. To like really, almost like they're giving you like the Spanish Inquisition. And so I tend to get that sense of feeling more at airports. With the police in general, no, I don't. I haven't, because I haven't experienced those people have racism in that way. I've experienced racism in other ways, but not directly through the police stopping me frequently. So I feel okay. I'm okay. They're there. Doesn't bother me. I don't think that I'm going to be targeted because I'm black. However, I am aware that if something comes up, that is going to be, for me, a motivating factor for them to push their agenda, I guess, if they have an agenda to push.
That, you know, I am white and have that privilege of being in a white skin. I cannot in a million years imagine what that must feel like, to know that the colour of my skin affects how people react to me. What is it, Robert, that you would want? Because, you know, we are allies, yeah? So there's been this new thing brought up about, you know, it's not enough to say I'm not racist. You now have to be actively so and become allies. One of the protests in America, they give this call and the white people come forward to protect the black people because it stops the baton charge. Literally, this makes me want to cry. It does. It really, I can't tell you how emotional I've been this week over it. So what is it that you believe? Because obviously we're not America, we're the UK, and, you know, reactions are different in some ways due to cultural divisions. That's not to say that it's any better, it's just that reactions are different. What is it, Robert, that you would say to us? Okay, Aneesh, David, you've said that you're allies. You say that you're going to actively, you know, go against racism. What is it that we need to do? What is it that the people are watching? What is it that you believe we need to do? I've asked you a massive question.
You know, I think that it's already happening. And what I mean by that is when I was watching the riots in London just recently, only a few days ago, or not riots, the protests, sorry. That was me, I don't know how I said riots. So when I was watching a protest in London, and I noticed that I couldn't help saying it to my partner. I said, most of that crowds are white. So most of them are white. I said, there's not that many people of colour. I was actually surprised that there weren't that many people of colour, but I was equally pleasantly surprised that there was so many light coloured skinned people there. And they were standing up for the simple fact that a person has died. And yes, it's a black person as well. And that this has to stop. And they were like younger people. So I think people don't have to necessarily come out and protest, but having that mindset that this is a person was killed because the colour of their skin. Now, really, we just need to ask ourselves, is that the right way for kids to be learning that it's okay to think like that this is acceptable and that there isn't anything wrong with it? So it's fostering in it that way, rather than turning the channel over, changing it to something else. Use that as a platform, as a learning tool to kind of, like I say, ask the kids what do they think, even asking themselves as well. It's about looking at our mindset, why we might choose to support something or why we might choose to not. And then if we choose not to, it's questioning ourselves genuinely, well, why not? Why would I choose to be on the other side, whereby that side is the one who's oppressing those people? Because my silence adds to their support, because they thrive on that. The more that we're silent, as you see in the news, once they stop showing things on the news, story dies down. But it doesn't mean it goes away. It's still there. So I feel that using this as a platform and using this to keep it alive. I was watching Barack Obama. He gave a speech on CNN, and he was saying, which is true, like I say, these protests, at some point, it's going to fade out. And what we have right now is a great platform for keeping this conversation, having this conversation to make this actual change, because it's that the only other time something like this came about was back in the civil rights march. And so I think using this as a platform, educate ourselves. Why do we think it's acceptable for someone to do that? Because that person's white and the other person's black. Why? So questioning ourselves, soul searching.
And also, yes, there's a call, isn't there, to call other people out that are, making statements, to challenge them on the statements they're making. What do you think about that in terms of, I know a friend of mine recently said something in the past couple of days, and I just thought, normally there's that sense of, keeping the peace, isn't there? But I just turn around and this is for me, who's very direct, but I just turn around and I said, hang on a minute, where did that opinion come from? What right do you have to say that, as if it's the absolute truth? Where have you challenged your own self on that? They were really quite surprised, but I was feeling a bit feisty. So, and equally, if somebody wants to challenge me back, it's not because I'm an oracle and know anything. So do you think that there are going to be more uncomfortable discussions? And do you think that there needs to be more uncomfortable discussions? Because the only way we can dig this out in society, because it's there, it's just there, isn't it? It's a cultural thing that carries on and in different ways in different cultures.
I can't get past that word uncomfortable. The thing, I guess, and I don't know if this is diverting away from what you're asking me, but
no, go with it.
I don't think it is. But if it's uncomfortable, we need to have a conversation why it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
If we find that bit out, I think we're a lot closer. So if it's uncomfortable, we need to know why it's uncomfortable. Yeah. And then and only then can we start to get to, because you're then starting to go underneath. So as long as we stay comfortable, we're resting on top. And if you're not willing to go underneath, then you're not going to get in there. So if it is uncomfortable, then that's because something's there. And so rather than trying to brush it over, yes, these conversations do need to be had. And many people are going to feel uncomfortable, but then through tension, change happens where things can progress positively for many people. It might not serve all, but it seems like it's that existential space that we have. And I say the paradoxes or the dilemmas that we have to go through, and it's about making those. It's about making that decision, but yet, as individuals, we also inflict it on ourselves by saying, "Okay, this is uncomfortable," rather than this conversation just needs to be had without bringing the emotions into it. As such, it just needs to be had. So if we can kind of set that bit aside, I don't know, maybe we can move a little bit forward, a little bit more, because we can focus less on our emotions and focus more on the objective part of it. But that doesn't mean the emotions are not part of it. It doesn't mean that they're not important. But if that's what makes people uncomfortable, sidestep it. And yeah.
So David, has he frozen? I think he's frozen. So I'll go back to you, Robert, and hopefully David will wave when he comes back in. I love this show. So that uncomfortableness, I loved that pause in there. I knew you were going to come out with something very profound, because invariably you do, Robert. We have lots of conversations and they always bring a lump to my throat and yeah, I think make me a more knowledgeable person and more emotional. Actually, you kind of inspire that in me. So, Robert, thinking about this, then, David, you're back in.
I'm back in the room.
Okay, so David, I'll pass it back on to you. So, David, thinking about these uncomfortable conversations, have you got anything in there that you would like to bring in? I mean, I'm all for the uncomfortable conversation, recognizing that whoever is in it is, feels that uncomfortableness. But what are your thoughts on this? Robert's just been incredibly profound, as he often is.
I caught most of what Robert was saying, and it is that feeling uncomfortable that means something's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's coming from, and that needs to be addressed. I watched the entirety of that video clip of George Floyd last night. I hadn't seen it all the way through. And I just happened to, I looked for it, to be honest. It came up on one of my news feeds. And towards the end, I was moved physically, emotionally, very deeply. And I asked myself, where's this come from? Am I shedding a tear for George Floyd? Am I shedding a tear for the plight of people of colour, of black people? Am I shedding a tear for the way society has allowed this to happen? Or am I scared for where we're at? And that went round in circles for quite some time. I'm still feeling it now, talking about it. And while we're on the subject of what can we do, calling out. And on top of that, this morning I'm listening to an interview with quite an old lady who was a protester outside the South African embassy during apartheid, and particularly after 69 people had just been shot at Sharpeville. And you know, and that we're talking history here, and we're talking about a beginning of a change then, especially apartheid. And yeah, I'm with Robert. We seem to be making it's progress, but it's mightily slow. And maybe this is a turning point. I hope so. I sincerely hope so with all my heart, that this will be a springboard and it won't go away and we won't let it die again. I certainly won't. I'm not sure how yet, but this is going to help. Platforms like this, being heard, pointing it out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In pointing it out, what does racial trauma mean to you, Robert? How would you define racial trauma?
You know, I don't. No, it is. It's so broad. Yeah. It's difficult to actually narrow it down, say this is what racial trauma is. But if I was to attempt to narrow it down, would be to be experiencing the traumatic effects, the psychological traumatic effects of trauma, because a person who's experiencing that is experiencing that because it's related to their ethnicity, their culture, their skin, overall. So, and that by anything that, so like myself, times where I could go to, it could even happen now, I could go to a village that I'm not familiar with. I could probably go there for a pub lunch, whatever, but I would know that once I enter into the village, that's where I then become self-conscious, because I'm conscious of my skin, that I'm black, and that there's probably going to be many black people in this in the town. So you'll get some people heads twisting and turning in surprise, and then you may get some who don't like you. And so because you're in a different town, you can feel like you're a miniature person on a big field, and so it's working through those psychological processes. And so when somebody reinforces that within that space, then by just acting, being racial towards it, then it just brings it all back. So what you encountered from when you first internalized it, however short or long ago it was, it just comes flooding back and then go away. It's a bit like just switching the radio on back from that era again, and so it plays from that time. And not only will it play from that time, it will also update itself to the present moment as well. Wow. So you have this radio station, Racial FM, playing in your head for however long, but you then have to, well, I wouldn't say you should, yeah, you do. We then have to think, well, how am I going to live with this? How am I going to still be able to get through and not let this really overwhelm me to an extent? And so you work on that psychologically and emotionally, and to kind of raise yourself above that. So it doesn't push you down, because that's what it is. It's almost like a big giant stepping down on you, and it just oppressing. And so I have to find ways to stay above it. Things that, for the sake of the skin color only, it's not something that white people go through in England. They don't go through it. They don't go through it in many countries, actually, because there isn't many countries that are heavily dominated, run by black presidents or anything, or prime ministers, in a way that oppresses white people. That doesn't happen as such. You may get little pockets of areas, but that doesn't compare to the world. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. Touch it.
Robert, how do you then cope with that? What is it that you do? What practical things could you share with us so that somebody who is Black, a person of colour, because you are inspirational, what do you do? What practically could you share so that people can learn from you?
I think they will find it very helpful to look back in time, going back to when slavery first started, back to the 1500s. Kind of, don't quote me now. I do have a couple of books. I can actually let you have the names of them later, but I do have a couple of books that I found very useful. And what it does, it kind of explains that how slavery came about, but not so much slavery, but how racism really came about. And for me, like I say, I found it very, very surprising actually, that although slavery began around the 1500s, that racism never really started until somewhere closer to the late 1700s or something like that. And that the reason, the rhetoric behind that was because of how the slave masters were treating the slaves, that they then felt that they had to justify this to the public, that this is why we treated them this way, don't worry about it, they're all bad people, they're all going to, Black people just going to rape and kill your kids and your wives and things like that. They can't be trusted. So if we treat them harshly in the way that we're doing, that will restrain them and control them and hopefully bring them round to our way of thinking. When really it was just their way of saying, and so then that set off Black people against white now, because it was then, oh, Black people are like this. Oh, we shouldn't try. And then so racism kind of born from there, and that really all that what was behind it was economic gain that was really behind it. And so learning about things like that, learning about, like I say, Black history, racism, ourselves, kind of being able to talk about our own demons and not keep them in, I think is the essential key as well, because when we do just keep it in, as we know as therapists, that it can often be something that will just burn away like acid inside us and then externalized in the wrong way. So I believe that being able to engage with ourselves and kind of explain what's happened and not, and then to start believing in those social messages. Start to, like say, it's the epistemology of whatever it is that we take on. We need to have our own beliefs for why we believe something's right or wrong, rather than just taking it because someone says, oh, Black people are all like this. We need to challenge our own selves and say, well, why do I think that? Why do I? What makes me say that? And did I learn that myself? Did I pick it up from somebody? How can I justify this? Will I be able to sell this to 1 million people rather than 10? And they would happily buy, those millions will buy it again. And I mean, kind of looking at it like that. And being able to let go of the anger as well. Let go of some of the anger and to be able channel it in a more intellectual way, because they're the players who we are appealing to, and it's not a question of us changing to suit them. It's a question of meeting them at where they are, but bringing them back to us, because that's why we're meeting them where they're at, because we want to bring them back to us, to the conversation. You know? And I think kind of having that hopefulness that what we're doing, as futile as it may seem, it might be a small chip, but eventually you'll get there. And we might not live to actually see that big radical change, but we might not, that might not be necessary, because we're witnessing some already. So everything that we're doing to positive make that change is therapeutic within itself, if we learn to manage our own frustrations, anger, and everything else, and not get drawn into that side of things, because that just takes it back to the street level. And yeah, on the street level, what I mean by that is just literally like brawling. So it'll be just like political brawling, mass brawling, if anything.
And certainly political parties will take advantage of that and almost incite it, don't they? David seems to have disappeared, but he'll be back. And almost to incite that. Clearly, I'm visibly very moved by you, Robert. I truly am. I just want to touch on anger. I am a fan of anger. In terms of that, it is a real clear indicator that is something wrong. And I think that you very beautifully explained that it's at that point where it affects your actions. So I think anger's great, isn't it? Because it's like, you know, I always say to people, you know, Gandhi didn't get kicked off a train in South Africa and go, well, that's not fair. You know, Gandhi was really pissed off. You know, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, it wasn't like, oh, well, you know, that anger motivated them. But yes, you're quite right, it's when that then affects things adversely and negatively for that person and those surrounding them.
Yeah, so like use the anger as a fuel, but try not to let the fuel burn you out. Use the fuel to keep you going.
Yeah.
Use that to keep you ignited, to keep you passionate. Keep back that last bit of element that wants to externally lash out just because of the frustration and the anger, more so, as opposed to putting a point across to make a change. Because I think that for me personally, if I cross that line, it's almost like, oh, kind of, that's a line too far. Okay. When I cross that line, because it's just taken, it's nonsensical, because things like that, violence doesn't solve things. Violence just creates more violence. It may win you things in places, but really, it's just more violence. So it doesn't really solve anything, and it sets people up to be more violent later through scheming to get people back. So yeah, leave that part out of it, and that's the part that I think eats away at a person's soul, because if they're unable to stop themselves from physically wanting to lash out, to me, that's poor emotional control in that moment. And people use that, justify that to from the situation, that it's okay to do that. But it's not okay to be violent towards anybody.
But is it understandable that sometimes it does boil over?
Whilst it's understandable. That I understand it, that it boils over. I am taking it more back to more like a physical sense.
Yeah.
That it boils over because people find it difficult. Those that do boil over, they find it difficult to contain that emotion, that fine line between talking and hitting. To find it difficult to contain that. And I think that when a person's in a situation where they are like that, I think they should take a step back, recheck, get back into a sense of more lateral thinking rather than emotional thinking kind of way, and then re-engage again. Because really, I know this is me just throwing it out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some twisted reverse psychology within the authorities' training that in order to win a protesting situation, antagonize. And then when they boil over, make them look the baddest. And then politically, they've won. So people just need to temper their emotions and just, but it's understandable, but it's not necessary. And I think people can do more to temper themselves in that way.
Well, as you know, Robert, I'm a somatic therapist, so I do a lot of bottom up, top down, because I wholly believe that you can get the thoughts of trauma and arrange them, but until you go into the body as well, it literally is a bubbling pot that's going to keep flipping up, because all the thoughts in the world cannot contain what that visceral anger that bodies can hold on to. David, you are very in and out today.
I am, aren't I?
You are.
But I am catching up. Obviously, bits are missing.
Yes.
But I did catch what Robert was saying and talking about control. My own personal thoughts are it's very difficult to contain any emotional response when you have a situation whereby the leader of the free world declares a peaceful protest in order to walk across the street in front of a boarded up place of worship with a holy book in his hand and stands there.
And clears it with tear gas.
Yes, absolutely. And as Robert said, it's difficult really to hold that down from a reactional point of view. It demands a reaction, and that image will stay in my mind for some time, as well as obviously the images I saw last night of George Floyd. But you've got two contrasts there, which are, I don't know, it screams oppression, it screams inequality, it screams, many things. That image just gives off that, I'm going to squash this, I'm going to put this down regardless of where it came from, and that's scary.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring in my usual, but I'm going to bring in compassion. And I think that right now we also need, for sure, the reaction is, again, it's that outpouring, and I'm saying to you, Robert, what is it that we can do? How can we become the best version of an ally that we can? But I think also there's that self-compassion as well, to bring in that compassionate other for yourself. That, I mean, I've cried a lot this week, more than I usually would, just because of feeling ineffectual and an inability. And indeed, Robert, when I called you the other night, I said, Robert, I want to ask you this, and I said I feel a bit uncomfortable asking you because I realise that I'm actually utilising the fact that you are black to get this message across. And you were like, Aneesh, that's fine, and make sure you bring that up in the recording type thing. And I think I put the phone down, and I said I'd spoken to David and said, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable because I'm deliberately, asking you. And David was just like, Aneesh, just ask. And afterwards, I spent some time with my compassionate other, my self-compassionate self, to say, do you know what, it's okay, you are not using your friend. Your friend has said, absolutely, I will come and do this. So I really did need to use my compassionate other, my self-compassion, to say, this is a really, and I'm not going to use the word, but you two know me very well and know which ablative I would use right now, an important moment to get somebody to come and speak, because this is so imperative right now. And I think my compassionate other is saying to that part of myself that was a bit nervous, Aneesh, this guy has spoken in the beauty that you knew he would be able to. It's okay that you asked your friend to do that.
And I felt, I'm really pleased and glad that you did ask me, because it's kind of, I got a chance, I've had a chance, and to be able to hear it as well come out of my mouth rather than just hear it in my head. And the way how it's kind of come out right now, it still sits with me in the same way how it was in my head, and that's great confirmation for myself in that way. In my insight into what's happening within the world, kind of looking a little bit more than just going to work and getting paid kind of thing, and being in a relationship. So thank you very much. But nevertheless, interesting how you felt that by asking, you potentially could have lost a friend, for how that story came about for you. I'm not asking you to say it now, but I'm kind of, it's kind of interesting. And and you being a white person as well, that kind of, it's like, oh, I'm going to lose a friend, and and this guy's a black guy as well, and he matters to me as well because he's my friend, and things like that. So it's very touching. So, well, thank you for sharing that.
Welcome. I'm a little bit weepy today. So, David, honestly, Robert, I just feel vastly humbled by what you said, and I think I've learnt more today than I have, and I've read, I've read a lot of books, but I think it's because I know you, and I think that has impacted me such a lot. So I'm going to carry on with you, David, and you can talk us out, because I'm going to be blubbing when I come off this.
I can from you then, Aneesh. Robert.
I can hear you frozen.
Time of I'm taking away from this. Okay.
Overwhelmed bit. I got the overwhelmed bit.
Start again, because you're.
I believe I might have frozen again.
You have. I don't think we're going to get.
Okay, Robert.
Technology, eh?
Yeah, I will give Aneesh time to compose herself if that's what's required. But there's no harm in crying, especially over something this huge. And I just want to thank you, Robert. As always, it's a pleasure to listen to you and share things with you. So thank you, Robert Hines. Thank you, Aneesh de Vos. I am David Buckler, and
thank you.
I'm pleased this is going out there. And again, it'll give us all a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.